conferences, you only get a few moments to talk with the speaker. You go listen to presentations, and then that's pretty much it. Beachfoot is a little bit different. All of the researchers come together, and there's a lot of presentations, so it's hard to kind of pin someone down for an interview. In between the presentations and at night, you get to sit around campfire and talk with everyone. I know last night, it was so cool sitting around the campfire, people talking about their encounters, talking about, even outside of Bigfoot, you just get to learn about the people in the field. It's such a cool event because everyone that comes, Todd Neese does a good job at selecting people come. There's no egos, everyone's cool, and you really get to learn more than just about someone's research. You get to learn about the person, and I love it. It's a relaxing time. I wish I would have been able to get more interviews. This is one of the last days of Beachfoot. Saw Adam Davies, always wanted to interview him, and so he was willing to sit down and interview. So that'll be coming up here in a moment. I also want to talk about the International Bigfoot Conference. I was made aware of that. That's going to be in September, I believe, in Kennewick. When I get back home, I will post it up to the website, all the information about the International Bigfoot Conference coming up. But let's jump to Adam Davies. I'm sitting here with Adam Davies. It's a great honor to have you on the show, sir.
Well, thank you very much, Wes. It's great to be here.
You're like the Indiana Jones of the cryptic world. You're always going to different countries. You're looking into things. And what I like about you is you will actually take what eyewitnesses say and then go look into it. Mm-hmm. And you're never critical of eyewitnesses. No matter what country you're in, you're never critical of eyewitnesses. You're willing to go look. But as far as Sasquatch goes, what got you into Sasquatch?
I was making a film with Jeff Meldrum called China's Wild Man. I'd always wanted to do that, and I know we'll touch on it later, but in synopsis I was there. And I'd always been a bit conscious of how I could add to the party, for want of a better word, with Bigfoot research, because I felt that in doing that, there was a very complex pattern. There was all sorts of different researchers all across the US, all with different methodology. And it wasn't like when I go to look for an unknown species in different areas, where I'll concentrate on a particular area, I'll look for the most credible eyewitnesses, and I'll focus in on that locale. There were plenty of places in the US where I could do that. So it was really a question of where to begin. But I sat down with Jeff in a hotel room in Beijing, and I said, well, let's talk about Bigfoot, yeah? He's a Bigfoot guy. Let's talk about that. And so we went through the Patterson-Gimlin film, and he showed me a number of things on it, and we all know about the Patterson-Gimlin film, so I won't wax on too much about it, but he showed me about the specific gait, the detail, the musculature, and why he felt that, in synopsis, it was genuine. So I was intrigued by that. But I went away and did other things, and it wasn't until 2012, when I made contact with Laurie Simmons about her research area, that I decided to take the plunge and do some Bigfoot research. And again, in synopsis, we got a photograph. There was a lot of evidence, knocking, growling, whatever else, but we got a photograph where Laurie and I were by the campfire of a white creature, what seemed to be white, but it isn't white, it's just because of the camera, looming over us. Now, lots of people have said, oh, could it be a sleeping bag? Could it be me? Could it be that? And there was all sorts of conjecture. But basically, for me, it was persuasive because I could see musculature, a sort of V-shape in the back. Now, I work out, but there's no way I've got a physique like that, let me tell you. I know it's radio. but he's laughing, people. He's laughing. But what I did was I sent that to Brian Sykes, the world's leading geneticist. Now, Brian Sykes has done a number of unique pieces of research, including the Iceman. He's talked about the European genetics and how it's been traced. He established the lineage of the Russian royal family after the Russian Revolution. I don't need to go through his CV. It's amazing. But he was persuaded enough by that to investigate it further. And on that basis, he went out and did some Bigfoot research with that. He actually paid for me. It's not in his book, so I think it's important I mention. He paid for me to go out and do qualitative research with him and Laurie into that area. So significant did he find that. It was kind of a world first for cryptozoology. So here you have a scientist not just being part of an expedition, but actually funding it, yeah? So he went out and did that, and he was reticent about his conclusions, I think it's fair to say. He did actually believe there was a Bigfoot at the time, and then he sort of withdrew back from that and said, well, because I didn't, you know, this is me putting my view on his words, and I think it's important to say that, because I didn't find qualitative evidence, I can't say that it was a Bigfoot. You know, it could have been a number of different variances. So that was a real tangible, significant event for me. And after that, what I decided to do was go to different areas and look at the different outcomes and habits of Bigfoot people. So the next time I went to the US, I went to Derek Randall's place, to the Olympic Project, and I went to Matthew Johnson's Sewa site and to the Sierra site with Justin Smeher. And the purpose of that was twofold. First of all, to see if I could gather scientific evidence for analysation. I was going to send samples back to Sykes. But secondly, to understand some of the methodology and different approaches of people and how they conducted themselves. So I went to the Olympic Project, and I had an enormously good time with those guys. I've got a lot of respect to them, their methodology, and to Derek Randalls, who leads it, and they do an excellent job. And while I was there, I called out a Bigfoot, and that was witnessed by a number of people, people I'd never met before. And
what do you mean you called out a Bigfoot?
What happened was, we were walking down a trail, and I saw a rock fall down this trail. And there seemed to be there was no wind or anything else, yeah, so I thought, well, that's unusual. It was almost like somebody was standing at the top of a scree slope when I'd been mountaineering, and they send debris down because of their movement. So I stopped, and I made a call, a Bigfoot call, and we got a Bigfoot call back, yeah? I made a number of calls, and I moved gently down the path, and this was witnessed by people who were there. For example, Shelley Covey Montana, Isaac Tien. There were a few people there, and people I'd never met before. And I was calling to the thing, and it was calling back. And then we got a call from across the other side of the locale. And it was fascinating. And we moved along, and what I did was, when I behaved, I tried to become the role of the alpha male. So I'd move along, make the call, move along, and then I urinated in the same way as you can do with when you're doing to agitate apes in the wild. And the thing went ballistic. You know, it was kicking off, and it was amazing. And I mean, it was a really good experience. And afterwards, Shane Corson had put down a voice recorder in the locale, and he played it on his radio show, what sounded like ape emulations. Now, you can't say with any certainty, I think it's important to say that, with any vocalisation, you can't say with any certainty. But it was significant for me. I was very pleased with what had happened there. So that was that. And then I moved on to Matthew Johnson's Sewa site, and he's a habituator. He very much believes in that methodology. And again, there was some evidence, there was certainly some evidence, in my view, of potential activity. And I also had this really weird, totally freaky experience where I saw these strange creatures, for want of a better word, which were small, black, with bright red eyes. And that was the most unusual and actually unpleasant experience of my life. And there's pretty much, there aren't many places I've not been to look for cryptids, but that was the single one where I thought that was enormously strange. And then after that, I went on to Justin Smeher, and spent some time in the Sierras, and tried to understand whether there was tangible veracity to his story about him shooting a Bigfoot. So I went to those three places, and I had a good time, certainly at the Olympic Project, and it was interesting going to the Sierras. I found no evidence there when I was in the Sierras. Nothing happened of any consequence. But Johnson site, because of what I experienced, kept coming back to me, in the sense that, and I took a lot of heat at the time. It was never my intention to talk about that at all, because there's nothing to verify. You know, I said, well, this is a story
for the audience, and they may not know the story. I know it, but a lot of people may not know the story. Do you want to just, and you can just give the cliff notes of what happened?
Yeah.
Because I know you're mentioning it. Some people might go, well, what's he talking about? Mm-hmm. So if you would, just give the cliff notes of what.
Yeah, I mean, so basically, I'd gone to his area. He said that there was Bigfoots in his area. He said he had a methodology which was 100% worked. And I said, well, I'll come and investigate and have a look, and if we can get some scientific evidence, or if, in other words, we can get hair samples, that was what I was interested in. But I'd heard a grunt, which was very specific, and he wouldn't have known about this grunt, and I heard this grunt in the Cascades. It was just a 2-second thing. When I'd been out with Laurie Simmons and only hear it, and I had heard it, and I heard in the plethora of recordings, there's all sorts of stuff he sends me, some of which I thought was more obscure and unlikely than others at the time. You know, for example, this name, speaking the names of individuals and things like that. But it was that and I wasn't really interested in that. It was the 2-second grunt I'd heard, which I know I'd heard before, which I had probably associated with a Bigfoot, and I heard it in amongst a plethora of recordings he had that persuaded me to go. So, really, in synopsis, I never saw a Bigfoot at Matthew Johnson's, but I did hear bipedal locomotion, or what seemed to be bipedal locomotion, in the surround of this solar area. It's basically a big circle, and there's lots of vegetation around it, and he has specific rules and protocols. And we heard that, never saw one, but we did see. There was on the third night we were there, I saw a beam of light, a straight beam of light on the pathway. And I said to John, what's that? And he said, I don't know. But it wasn't consistent with moonlight or other things. But then it started to crackle. There were lights, yeah, like blue, you know, like electric lights, blue and red light. Yeah. And this mist formed, this red glow, and out of it popped these 2 creatures, and they were small, black, stockily built, red glowing eyes, and they were just mooching around the pathway at the first. But I was like, you know, to John, what the heck are those things? I have no idea. He was like, I don't know. And we described them, what we were seeing, both of us, to one another, because we wanted independent verification of what we were seeing, because it was so strange. And then they weren't doing anything in particular. And then at one point, when I said to John, you know, I'm not going to go to bed with those damn things around, you know, there's no way, you know, what the heck are those? And he said, he turned to them at that point, and he said, well, what are you going to do if we don't go to bed to these things? And then at that point, they charged up the pathway, and they had this red orangey glow, and but the thing that I thought about it was, you could see the anger on this thing's face. It was like, oh, you know, I could see the anger on this thing's, and I was like, that was the worst moment, because I remember standing there watching these things, thinking, I'm going to fight it, but at the end of the day, how do I fight this thing? You know, I mean, this is how I'm going to die. This is it for me. And no one's going to know how I'm going to die. I died. And I just thought, oh, this is just awful. So to just try and get a better look at them as we're going up, we shine a flashlight, yeah? And then, boom, they're gone. It was like they were never there. So we stopped and we waited, and we were just talking about how crazy it was and what happened. Then this thing starts glowing again, and these damn things come out. And I'll talk about it another time, but we'll go but in synopsis, they kept coming out. We kept shining these lights, and they kept disappearing. And it happened for hours and hours and hours. Yeah, we could really see them. And it happened again on the second night. Yeah, same thing. Nothing happened during the day, but the same thing. There was never any Bigfoot activity or potential Bigfoot activity, whatever you want to call it, when these things were around. It was a solo thing. And, you know, but afterwards, when I came back, it troubled me. I mean, I was never going to talk about it, and it's public knowledge that Johnson talked about it in his conference that he did. I didn't know he was going to talk about it. Neither John or I had any idea. But he developed a notion that they were guardians of the portal, yeah? Something. And I thought, well, I don't agree with that at all. There's no way that these things can be guardians of anything. He didn't see these things attack John and I. He said they were bluff charging. Well, they weren't. You know, I was there. I know what I'm talking about. They were not bluff charging anybody. They were going for us, and we had to repel them in some way. And we were fortunate that by accident we did. Yeah, I'm not claiming that I had a solution to that problem, because I didn't. You know, I was just lucky, I think. And also the points he makes, I think, about the idea that a species, or his view is that all Bigfoots, I think it's fair to say this is his view, are benevolent, certainly in that area, and good and everything else. And I have a real problem with that, because the idea that an entire species, especially a sentient one, is all going to be good, I just don't think is possible. That would never be the case. And it's easy to analyse why that wouldn't be the case. So, for example, even if you look at your dogs, you have grumpy dogs, you know, aggressive dogs, nice dogs, kind dogs, all of that. When you look at people, there are people who are more aggressive than others, people who are gentle. You know, I don't need to go on anymore. The point's made, I think.
I agree with you. And I appreciate that you came out and talked about it, because there's a lot of strange things that go on in the forest. And I don't know that that's necessarily Bigfoot related. But before we actually went on air, I was telling you about the Vikings. And the Vikings have that lore of these gods in the forest with glowing red eyes, and they leave food out for them, and it's basically so they don't get attacked. And that's what it made me think when you were telling that story. When I originally heard it, that's the first thing that came to my mind. But you've searched the world. I mean, you've gone... I don't think there's a place on the planet you haven't been to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Looking for, cryptid everything. When you're looking into what's the difference between, like, the United States, China, Russia, the view of Sasquatch, Bigfoot, urine, almonds. I mean, they have a name for it. We're all talking about the same thing. But what is there anything that you've found from country to country that's different, in the sense that, like, it's more accepted in one area than another? Like, let's say, like China, for example, the urine. Is it more accepted than in the United States with Sasquatch?
I think that with China and the urine, I think it's accepted. It was gradually becoming more accepted. I mean, one of the things that interested me, because I pitched Monster Quest to do that film, and one of the things that interested me was that there'd been stories about the Chinese urine going back for many centuries, so long before there were plastic Bigfoots, yeah, or people even heard of it. BC, there were accounts being recorded, and you can see the pictures of a hairy man that lives in Hubei province. And also, one of the things I thought as well was that there was serious academic research going on, or had been in the past, by Zhu Gaoqing from the University of Beijing, into the thing. So I was very interested in finding out what was going on there, and I was glad I did, because on the basis of that Jeff Meldrum who came there, for part of the show I was doing tracking with a guy who he kind of looked like Oddjob. He's called Mr. Yuan, and he was really tall guy. He had his jaws wired together, and he had hands like that, yeah? And he became very friendly with me. He's a nice guy. And in fact, the camera crew, Aaron, who was doing the filming, Mr. Yuan grabbed hold of me like that and insisted on holding my hand, yeah? And there was a lot of mirth about that. And then he saw that, he thought, Aaron was appreciating that he was holding his hand, so of course he held Aaron's hand too. So then we've got two guys holding hands with this great big Chinese guy in the middle, and it's very unusual to have a big Chinese guy. But he had found a print previously that he said was from the Yeren. He talked about how he'd seen it basically on a rock, moving around, sleeping, and then afterwards he'd followed it, got some tracks. And Jeff looked at that print while we were there and was like, this is something really significant. And as a result of that, it was a fascinating piece of research. So for the first time, there was a joint collaborative scientific project, as far as I'm aware. It's the first time between the Chinese and the Americans on this sort of thing, and they published a paper together on that print, basically. And Jeff postulates in that paper about the connection possibly between the Yeren and some of the prints and associated with the North American ape. Yeah. So it was a great piece of research. I was really proud about that. In answer to your question about other countries, I think Russian scientists have taken an interest when I've been out there in the Caucasus, and I've been involved in some degree in the research there. Not in Sumatra so much, but more so because of the body of evidence that's just been found as part of the Orang Pendek project. They will be. So I think it's a misnomer to say that scientists aren't necessarily interested in doing research. Certainly they're more cautious because some of the people, individuals, can be prescribed as being kooky. But if you've got decent substantive evidence, then they would analyse it if there was an ability to do so. But what people need to be aware is that these things cost money, yeah? So why should they analyse it? And they need a good reason. And I think one of the problems with some of the methodology used is that it can seem vacuous. And I'll give you a specific example. So if you are using the habituation method, there's and this is what I'd say is habituation isn't now used by people so much anymore. Jane Goodall doesn't use it, for example. I know she's off-quoted. But you either... And this is not specific to any individual, it's a general point, and I want to emphasise that. But you either put up or shut up. And what I mean by that is if you are Bobby in Arkansas and you say you have a Bigfoot in your garden, then fine, and you just want to enjoy that feeling or whatever else, and you want to do that, then okay. If that's your role, that's your prerogative, it's not for me to judge. But if you say I've got a Bigfoot in the back garden and you start putting a YouTube video out and monetising things, or you're writing books and making money off people, then you should rightly be open to objective scrutiny. And if you can't take that, then get out of the kitchen, because you put yourself there and people are paying their hard-earned dollars because they believe in what you're saying, or they're interested enough to do that. So you have to produce evidence, scientific evidence, which can be independently corroborated and tested and objectively analysed. And if you're not prepared to do that, then it's not correct. It's not a correct approach. That's all I can say. So, and I think the problem with the habituation method in the United States is that so far it's failed to do that. Now, I'm not saying that it's an incorrect approach, it's right or wrong, wherever else. I think, whatever works as far as I'm concerned, yeah. So if you are somebody who sets up lots of trail cams, which I've done in the past on a number of occasions, and that is the best approach and that's what works elsewhere, because it does, then good luck to you, yeah. But if you say, on the other token, I've got one in my garden, then I expect evidence from it. I expect it damn quick. Because you should be able to get that a lot quicker than somebody who's setting up trail cams in areas. I've been involved, spoken to people who've set up trail cams for tigers and all of that lot, and it can be a long, arduous process to do that. So if one's 400 yards from you and you see it every day, then let's see, show me. Show me.
I wanted to ask you, and I tend to agree with you on that, either put up or shut up in situations like that. Some of this becomes, and you and I both know this, but especially here in the United States, somewhat of a religion. Mm-hmm. It seems like it turns more into like a religion than it does really to do with a cryptid. I wanted to ask you, though, the one in China with the footprint, did he describe the creature?
Yeah, he did. You'll have to forgive me because I've done a lot of stuff since, so my memory isn't as sharp as it should be on it. I'd have to go back and look at my notes to be really specific. But yeah, he did. From what I can recollect, he was about 6 foot tall. We had orangey hair, rather, and it was sat on a rock, and it was just really sat there doing not very much, and he observed it for a while and he watched it walk away, and the thing that struck him, because he was a tracker, that was what he did, what he did all his life, but it walked bipedally, so it walked like a man, but it clearly wasn't a man. Yeah, it wasn't as tall or as robust physically as the North American ape, but it was clearly something that was not any known native species, and he, since a boy, had been there all his life. That was his lakar, and he thought that was why he started to make the prints and get that evidence. And the Chinese were you know, when I was there, were extremely helpful. I encountered no hostility. It was my idea to do the film. I told the embassy in Beijing I was going to do it, and they were polite. You know, I mean, they were polite and helpful. And I think there is some curiosity amongst a lot of people in the world about finding some answers to some of their legends and stories, and trying to do that. And I think that's noble. Yeah. So there isn't. You may get hostility from individuals or certain members of the governments in different areas. I'm not talking about, but what I'd say to you is I've not encountered any roadblocks anywhere in the world which has stopped me from doing my research, even in places which you think may be more closed than others. Everyone has always been very helpful.
When you looked into the Russian amnesty, what fascinates me about the amnesty is the witnesses' descriptions. They seem very, here in the United States, when people talk about Sasquatch, depending a lot on locations, some witnesses will say it looked like a chimp. Some witnesses will say, yeah, it looked very much more human-like. Some witnesses will say it looked more ape-like. But the one thing I thought was interesting, and I know you were there, with the amnesty, it seems like every witness encounter I've listened to or watched on the internet, they always talk about it being more human-like. Mm-hmm. And did you find any evidence or anything when you were there?
I didn't find any substantive evidence that could be independently scientifically analysed. I think that's important to state. I did find some seemingly credible eyewitness reports, which exactly concur with what you've just said. Yeah, and I think there's a wider point here with a lot of these things outside of North America that people need to understand, and it's how you present something, and the way oft is portrayed in the media about Yetis and Bigfoots and all of this lot. They can, to the general public, it's often portrayed slightly vacuously as a big monster that lives in the woods. So what I do in turning it around on its head is say, really, in a number of these places, if we look at evolution, even 20 or 30 years ago, I'm in my 40s, 20 or 30 years ago, it was very much doubted that we were kind of unique, in the sense that we've been alone as a hominid for a very, very long time, and there's been nothing that has, Neanderthals have died out, for example. That's a classic way of describing it. But what we've learned since is that, there are a number of our ancestors or symbols of parallel evolution, I'll come on to that show that we haven't been. Flores man, Denisovans, all of those sort of things. And they've only come out in the last 20, 30 years. And what I'd say to people is, if I say to you Jungle Yeti about the Orang-Pendek, it sounds bullshit, yeah? But if I say to you, look, what I think it is an orangutan that in reaction to its circumstances evolved to walk bipedally, and it's a symbol of parallel evolution, and it lives in an area which is very remote, in jungle, which you could perfectly adapt in the ecosystem, then there's nothing inherently implausible about that. We have not been alone for millions of years. We've not been around for millions of years, and all we are saying is that there are things like us that may still exist in remote corners of the world. And that's what I've been seeking to substantiate. And all of that is possible. The question is, are they still around in these remote pockets? And one of the things I've just done, for example, is investigated the Yeti with Josh Gates. I've just been in Nepal and looked at that. And I've been all around the world because I passionately want to understand that point, about all of these things. Could they still be around? And of course, I've come to the conclusion that they are, based on too many years of research now. Too many years. But it doesn't so much matter what I believe. What matters is can I garner evidence that is independently scientifically tested. And what I believe should be almost irrelevant in the argument. And if I contrast that with Bigfoot research, and I think this is a very important point that I want Bigfoot people to realise, Bigfoot researchers to realise, please don't emulate certainties in discussion. Don't say I am right, yeah? You are not right until it's scientifically independently corroborated. You are not right until then. There is no such thing as certainties in research. Ever. Yeah. So I have this special relationship with Bigfoots. They only talk to me, they understand me. Well, you know what? I'll go and bust that myth if I have the time. And it you know, the bête noire always has to be, can it be independently scientifically tested and scrutinised? Yeah. So it's very important we deal with it that way.
Yeah, I'm picking up.
All right, good to see you, Shane, man. I'll see you soon, yeah?
We will.
Shane, take care.
All right,
Shane Corson, Monster X. Want to say hi?
Hey, everybody.
See you, Shane. I'll hit you up later, man.
Mm-hmm. When you were up with Josh Gates and the Yeti, do you find anything compelling?
I did find things I'd say were very interesting and persuasive. I'm not allowed to say exactly what I found right now because of the contract of the film, and it's very simply put. It's not me trying to.
No, I get that. I understand.
I just can't talk about it till it's out. Hopefully, it'll be out in summer. It all depends on how the editor as to what we found, but I think it's fair to say that we did find. I was encouraged by what we found. Yeah, I think it's fair to say that.
But, you know, what do you say to someone who says, Adam, these creatures seem to be found on almost every continent. Every country has a name for them, whether it's Jiren, Almasty, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Yeti, and yet there's no one that's... It's kind of like if there was an elephant on every continent and we had a name for it, the Russians had a name for it, you know, people in Nepal had a name for it, the Chinese had a name for it, yet no, there's not a dead one. No one shot one. No one's brought one in. Do you think there's like a cover-up? Do you feel like there's a cover-up going on with this? Because I remember someone had asked me that, and it kind of hit me, and I didn't really have an answer for them on that, because not so much on the government cover-up, that's a whole different show, but it's fascinating that it's like on every continent, people are seeing them. There's thousands and thousands of eyewitnesses. And yet there's really not a whole lot of, there's nothing really to show as far as, you'd think someone would have shot one, I guess is where I'm getting at by now, and brought one in and said, here you go, I shot it, you know.
I think it's a good point. I think generally speaking, I think there's three different levels you've touched on. Generally speaking, I think they're very rare, they're very hard to find, and I could see no, and I don't want to go on about how the decomposition of bodies in the jungle and things like that, because you get that. Yeah. And the argument about what happens in North America as well, and how
recycles itself.
Yeah, exactly, and how rare you find things like bear skeletons. That's all been done to death. I think that so they're very rare, and you know, you'd be lucky to find fossil records of a number. There are many species we don't know about simply because we haven't got fossil records of them. Some of them are quite common, etc., etc., etc. I think the second point you make about government conspiracies is a good one, and what I'd say is that governments don't normally act as a homogenous entity to conspire to things. Yeah, there may well be rogue individuals, or there may well be departments. I have no evidence of that, but it's possible. But the idea that a government works in symbiosis to stop Bigfoot, for example, being found would be a fallacy. Often the left arm doesn't know what the right arm's doing, yeah? And even in intelligent agencies, again, this is public knowledge, they are often criticised for not sharing information between themselves, yeah? So that is not plausible. What is plausible is individuals in particular areas may say, well, shut up about it. Or there may be something where people are discouraged from talking about things. But I just don't think the government would be very cautious about those sort of things unless there was a movement. Simply because if you're a government employee, you don't want to be seen spending tax dollars on something like Bigfoot. You know, it's public funds, and people are like, well, you know, I don't want my money being spent on you going investigating Bigfoot. That's what, you know, it's not there. But what I can say is that if, for example, DNA evidence, you don't need habeas corpus. If DNA evidence is produced, then I'm fairly confident from my contact with government scientists in the past. I mean, what I mean by DNA evidence, I mean a scientific paper which is peer-reviewed and published in something like Nature. I don't just mean it comes back as unknown, yeah? It needs to be of a very high standard. Always, 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 extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. Right. So it has to be of that level. But if it does, then I'm very confident and I know that there would be a research project and credible scientists and government would be involved. And I think as well, again, people need to think that there's not there's no conspiracy, that those sort of studies would happen. But the bar of proof is very, very high, and the government's not going to invest tax dollars in those things because it would not be electorally the right move.
What did you find in Sumatra?
Well, in Sumatra, that's probably one of the most interesting places. Again, I was interested in the legends. The legends of the Orang Pendek go back to Marco Polo. So you're talking, 13th century or whatever. I mean, a long, long time. I'm talking about hairy people that live in the woods. And I've collected a huge amount of eyewitness projects. And there's been some very notable people who've done research, not just I, but most specifically, and there are a number, but I'm not going to do a big list. But Debbie Martyr and Jeremy Holden were very important in gathering a lot of evidence about the Orang Pendek. And I found, together with teams I've been out with, so it wasn't just me, a print evidence which was analysed by Chivers at Cambridge and Jeff Meldrum has come back as unknown primate. We found hair samples which were scrutinised by Hans Brunner, and who did the dingo baby case in Australia, and we worked for the Australian police at the time, so if he was good enough to work for the Australian police in a potential murder case, he is somebody you can't dismiss him as a scientist. And he said, well, looking at this, it comes back as unknown primate. So there's a credible body of evidence. But what's really exciting now is, after I took Cliff Barrickman from the Finding Bigfoot show to Indonesia, took him into the jungle and did all of that, he decided to form something called the Orang Pendek Project. It was his idea, not mine, and he paid for that. And that's got many casts. I can't remember off the top of my head how many he's got, but like 50 odd, yeah. And I'm sure that will become the subject of a paper at some point. And I'd hope that the evidence for the existence of the Orang Pendek will really only be a matter of time.
How do witnesses describe the Orang Pendek?
I'd have to do a generic description, obviously, but broadly speaking, roughly about 5 foot tall, darker hair or on its body. But there are two things that are really important, I think, about it. Often they describe a huge torso, so a very strong physical, muscular physique, yeah. And the other thing is, they say it runs like a man, yeah. And one of the most important eyewitnesses, Sahara Tracker, who I went out into the jungle many times with, who sadly passed away now. He was so moved when he saw it and he was a hardcore guy. He lived, on the edge of the jungle, and he went out trekking all the time, and he dealt with tigers and all of that. He burst into tears, yeah? And so you have this little hardcore Indonesian guy actually sobbing when I'm hugging him. So moved was he by seeing that. So often people can have, the correlation, and I'm aware that often people have this in North America, a very strong emotional reaction when they see something like that, almost like a cognitive dissonance point. I can't actually believe what I'm seeing because it doesn't make sense. It really doesn't. But it actually exists.
Have you had any violent encounters with the Orang Pendek?
I haven't. I spent some time with the king of the Senakalam. Yeah, they're a tribal people, and they're often called the Kubu. So, but there's a longer name for them, and I forgive me, I can't remember it right now, but that's the more appropriate, the longer thing. And he described how he and his son had been out hunting, and one had chased them, yeah? Had come down the path like that with his arms up and ran towards them, and they'd run away from it, and they'd hidden. and he described how it had been looking for him. This thing had been looking for him in the bushes, yeah. But that was the only actually aggressive encounter I ever heard about in all the years I studied of the orang pendek. The classic encounter is people stumble across it. I don't think it's got superior hearing to it, which is interesting. One of the guys I met described how he saw two of them fighting, over some young rattan shoots, like a foodstuff, and he stumbled across them as he was walking on the trail, and they were a bit so engrossed they didn't see him, and then they picked up and ran away. The other ones describe how it forages. So it forages for fruit on the edge of the ever encroaching into the jungle farmland, which is another whole new story, or it's raided for sugar cane. It seems to like high calorie sugar stuff. So those are the things, and nearly in all encounters the person stumbles across it, it's surprised, they're surprised, and it runs off in different ways and variances, but that's it. Yeah,
it's interesting. It sounds like Sasquatch. There are violent encounters. I have talked to witnesses who had violent encounters, but I would say the bulk of the encounters, that's exactly what it is. They come in, they see the creature sees them, they both kind of freak out and part ways. It's such a fascinating topic. I mean, if someone were to ask you today, Adam, what do you think Sasquatch is? What would you say to them?
I'd say right now I really don't know, and it's speculation. But what I'd say is, what intrigues me about Sasquatch, I've studied apes, great apes in the wild, so I've been very privileged to do that. I've seen things that a lot of people haven't been privileged to. So I've seen gorillas in the wild, I've seen orangutans in the wild. I'm not going to do a whole list, but I've seen them. I've seen their behaviour, and what strikes me is the level of sentience of Sasquatch seems to be far greater than any of those primates. Yeah. So the big question I want answered about Sasquatch is just how bright it is. That's what I'm interested in. Does it have a? I don't think it's ever going to. I don't believe it's a magical Bigfoot with lots of powers of healing and all of that. I think that's not plausible. But what does it have a level of intelligence which is near our own to some degree? So is it in some ways in between, say, something like an orang, which is highly intelligent, probably the most intelligent of the grey apes, that can do quite sophisticated sign language, and you could see some of the things it does. It's amazing. And ourselves, yeah. Where does it lie? Yeah, because that has all sorts of philosophical implications in relation to sentience for us, and also in understanding our own lineage. Yeah, I think we need to be. Humans are an arrogant species, and I think we need to be careful of the notion that we're particularly special. And I'm not talking about from a theological point of view. I'm talking about from a physiological and sentient point of view, if that makes sense.
It does. Yeah, I know you've studied more than just unknown hominids and Sasquatch and all these other things. You look into lake monsters. Mm-hmm. What would you say is probably the most interesting cryptid you've looked into that you really thought there's something to this beyond Bigfoot? I'm talking, whether it be even Dogman, I don't know if you want to bring that up, but or lake monsters, or what is one you looked into where you thought there's something to that? There really is something to that.
Well, Dogman, I haven't done anything on it yet. I will do on the basis of some information that you've just given me, yeah? So I will do. I have a problem with Dogman because I can't see the genus. So in other words, I can't see how that could have evolved, yeah? But that doesn't mean to say I won't have a crack at it, as I'm right now near the border of San Diego. I'll have a look at that stuff. And I've got to keep an open mind. It's important I do that. Cryptids, well, I saw the Cellured serpent in Norway. It's the only one I actually saw.
What is that? Can you describe it?
The equivalent of the Loch Ness Monster in Norway. And I saw that undulating through the water. I could see the undulating motion as it moved through the water. I could see the barbs on its back. And I can say that with some confidence because at the time the team I was with also dropped hydrophones in the water. Now, hydrophones are interesting because I think they're better than sonar, although sonar's there. It's because sonar can show an object, a large object moving through the water, but there's no further determination as to what it might be reasonably. You can do some supposition. But the hydrophone can show the noise emissions it records in the same way as you're recording me now. So what we can do with those is we can cross-reference that to a known species and draw some interesting conclusions. So what we did there was we sent those off to the Marine Research Institute in Bergen, who are experts in their field. Dr. Soldal came out at the end of it saying, I am astonished to say it's an unknown species. Yeah. So at the same time as we were seeing the serpent, there were noise emissions being made or things which was from an unknown species. It's pretty exciting stuff. So that's probably, aside from the hominids, that's probably the one that was the most credible because of the evidence I've just stated. I mean, I've done some very hardcore things. I've been to the jungle and I got to Lake Tele to look for the Maquilia member, the Congo dinosaur, and that was a whole deal of pain. And while it was a great adventure, I didn't find anything substantive. I found some eyewitness reports, but nothing substantive. But I think it's important to say that because one of the things that I'm a little bit wary of is that when people associated with Bigfoot, you can go out and just be lucky, yeah? But when people have multiple sightings in different areas, I sort of think, well, I've been doing this for many, many years, and I saw the cellular serpent, but it wasn't then I was all over the world, and I got close to seeing things like the Arampedec, but I never saw them. It wasn't until many years later from that, what was it, 16, 17 years later, I think, off the top of my head, before I actually saw anything else, you know. So when someone says, well, I saw a Bigfoot in Oregon, and then 3 months later I saw one in Washington, and then I saw one in Kentucky, I mean, I have to doubt the credibility of whether that's remotely plausible.
Yeah. One thing I thought was interesting, you were talking about the apes and how you studied them in the wild. I had a guy on Friday's show, two brothers, and they are having issues with these creatures coming in, and the whole their I say neighborhood, I mean they're like on 5 acres, the next plot over is 5 acres, and make a long story short, one thing that made me think of the ape when we were talking about it last night around the fire is one of the brothers was chased by one, and they didn't know what they were at first. They thought one of the brothers thought it was demons. Didn't know what it was. This thing had chased him up through his garage. He went inside the house, closed the door. Well, it had stopped. So he goes in and tells his brother that he just got chased by something. And his brother's like, okay, well, let's go check it out. So they go in there. In the garage, there's like 22-inch tracks from muddy tracks. But the part that I thought was fascinating, and I've never heard another witness say this, both of the guys go, you know, it peed. And I go, what? And they go, yeah, it looked like it had peed as it was chasing him. And I don't know if that's like a primate thing. I mean, you ever heard of primates doing that when they get excited?
Yeah, well, they certainly pee when they're marking their territory, yeah? It could have peed because it was afraid, we don't know. Yeah. But there's so much we don't know about these things. Yeah. And I think that goes to the point of dealing with certainties. You know, it's okay to say you don't know. I think it's okay to say I made a mistake, I was wrong, yeah? What's not okay, that sometimes can happen in Bigfoot research is, I am sure.
Yeah.
You're not sure.
Not sure of anything.
You're not sure. And we all make mistakes, we can all be fallible, we can, you know, until you have even if you had a scientific study for years and there were ones studying in locale, you still wouldn't be sure about anything, probably for about a decade, you know. Yeah. So
appreciate you saying that. You know, my viewpoint's changed a lot over the years with this. And it seems like when you think you have it figured out, you realize you don't have anything figured out.
But do you say when you've changed your opinion? I changed my opinion based on evidence.
Oh, of course, yeah, of course.
That's right. Yeah. How many people have you come across? I don't know the names where you've come in Bigfoot research where they've not changed their opinion. Very few, regardless of what evidence is presented to them. Because you know, it can almost be an ideological thing. This is my view, of how this thing works. I've never seen one, or even if I have seen one, I've caught a glimpse of it. And on that basis, I do my research this way. And I'm not going to change no matter what you say. Yeah, and I'm sure. No, you need to. At the end of the day,
I always say I don't have one in my garage I'm studying,
Yeah.
and until I have one in my garage I'm studying, I know sometimes I'll have witnesses on and they'll say, well, you know, you're the, you know what you're talking about, and I really don't know any more than anyone else.
all you're doing is presenting. All you should be doing is presenting reasonable hypotheses of how you think it might be. Yeah. So if you said to me, "Are you sure about something?" I'd always say, "No, I'm not sure." But what I'd say is, "This is my best educated hypothesis, educated on the basis of my experience, and it no way means I'm right. I'm just trying to figure it out in the best way."
Yeah, you come up with theories on different things, but like anything else, especially with theories or hypotheses, you know, they change over time, depending on new data, new, you know, information that comes in. It can change over time. It has to change over time. Yeah. Otherwise, we already got it figured out. What are we doing here? You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. If there was no questions to be answered, then there wouldn't be any point, would there?
Yeah. Well, Adam, I appreciate your time. I appreciate you coming on the show. I really enjoyed it, and I enjoyed meeting you at Beachfoot. Like I said, I always wanted to meet you, and it's a true pleasure.
Oh, thank you very much, Wes. And you know, one of the things I say is, coming soon at the International Bigfoot Conference, I'll be doing a presentation on the latest research that I've just done, which I think many of your listeners will find revelatory. So that's coming up, and hopefully we can talk again soon, and I'll tell you all about it.
Thanks, sir. I'm hanging out with Russell
Acord, how you doing?
Ed Brown, and the old Woodster.
Yep, Woody Pratt.
And what I want to do, guys, I know you guys have the International Bigfoot Conference coming up. You guys talk a little bit about it. What can people expect? I know we're going to be going. So for all the people out there listening, Woody and I will be there. For the audience, will you guys talk about what the conference is about, what people can expect?
Going to get some of the latest and greatest evidence pulled out of the field. Some of the top cryptozoologists, the top researchers on the planet that are going to be here. It's international, so we made a draw from all walks of life, it seems like, and just got a really dynamic lineup. Ed, what?
Oh yeah, we've got world-leading scientists, world-leading cryptozoologists, world-leading researchers. We've even got up-and-comers coming. That was the idea of the whole conference in the first place, was to give the up-and-comers an opportunity to share the stage with the big guys, you know, and let them get their research out, let people know who they are and what they're doing, because they've got some really cool stuff too.
When is the conference?
September 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. It's over Labor Day weekend. That way everybody can come in, have a great time, not worry about having to rush home on Monday. Everybody has Monday off. So it's Friday afternoon for the meet and greet, Saturday speakers, Sunday morning speakers, and then a chance to win some really amazing prizes on Sunday. Actually, throughout the entire event, we'll give something away every hour. And then the big major door prize is a four-wheeler on Sunday. So
Brand spanking new quad. Brand spanking new.
You guys got real gifts, not like Sasquatch Chronicle shirts we give out.
Sure, we'll give a couple shirts out, but whatever you guys want to give us I'm just teasing.
No, absolutely.
No, we have some really amazing local sponsors from the Tri-Cities area. We have McCurley Chevrolet and the Thunder Alley Motorsports, who is the ones who donated the four-wheeler, which was a really generous thing to kind of get them out there. That they're competing with Harley. They have the victory. They have just state-of-the-art, top-notch equipment there. But for them to donate a four-wheeler to give away on Sunday, that's a pretty generous gift right there.
Very generous gift. Yeah. And so where's it at, and what are the dates again, Ed?
It's going to be in Kennewick, the Tri-Cities area in Washington. It's going to be at the
Three River
Convention Center. Tri-City Convention Center.
No, Three Rivers Convention Center. Yeah, it's
do you guys know where it's at, or?
Yeah, it's actually, if you've ever gone to a concert in the Tri-Cities, it's generally at the Toyota Center. They share the same parking lot as for your big major concerts, but the convention center will seat 3,500 people comfortably. It's when you step inside, it's just really architecturally very beautiful. You feel like you walked into an airport that's just been designed. It's a fairly new building to the Tri-Cities. Great facility for just conventions just like this. They will be serving their own concessions there, so that you're not going to come there and not have, you don't have to leave the building to go find food. It'll be there. So it'll be, and about that time of the year, it's over 100 degrees, most likely. So you're going to be in great air conditioning environment and great company. So.
And where can people go to find out more about it?
Go to the internationalbigfootconference.com. And with that, you get a list of the speakers, door prizes. Hotels are available. Russ did a great job, by the way, of setting up hotels, but that deal is just about over. I'll let Russ touch on that in a minute. But discounts have already been worked out. All they got to do is call the hotel that they choose, tell them they're with the International Bigfoot Conference, and boom, they get a discount automatically. So that's already been taken care of. It's going to be a phenomenal event. It really is. It's going to be awesome.
You can, if you go on the upper tabs of the web page, you'll be able to look at the sponsors and the hotels, which you can click on a link right then and there, or there'll be a phone number provided. They've blocked out a certain amount of rooms for each hotel that will expire as of August 2nd. They only do it 30 days out, and then they will give them to the public so that the public can use them for the Labor Day weekend. If you wait till after August 2nd, you'll be paying full price instead of the discounted rate for number one. Also, tickets are available. Right now, that's the only way that we're selling tickets is online through our webpage, but they will be available at the front door as well. So it's whatever you choose to do. If you want to be ahead of the game and get your tickets early, we'll have your tickets made up for you, or your badges made up for you before you get there. So it helps. Yeah.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. Woody and I will be there. And thanks, guys, for your time. I can't wait for it. And if people go to SasquatchChronicles.com, I'll link up to the website. That way you guys can check it out, too, as well.
Make sure you like our page also, International Bigfoot Conference Facebook page. Make sure you go in there and like that as well, because that's where all the information's going. It's going there first. All the things that are coming up, all the exciting news that's happening. Because I think out of our 14 presentations, there's at least 4 that I know are groundbreaking, never heard before, new stuff. So, and that's at least 4, and then there's probably more. So it's going to be awesome.
Yep. See you there. Thank you.
See you guys there. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Wes.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
And that's it for tonight, everyone. Remember, if you've had an encounter and you'd like to be on the show, shoot me an email, wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. I hope to see you guys at the International Bigfoot Conference. Until next time, everyone, have a great night.
Welcome to the show, everyone. Thanks for being here tonight. Got a great show planned for you tonight. Going to be bringing Scott on the show. And I was fascinated by Scott's encounters. It's this little area, and I'll post it up along with his encounters that he reported to the BFRO. But what's interesting about his encounters is in that general area, if you look up the BFRO reports from that time period in that specific region, you'll find multiple reports. And so when I spoke to Scott, him and I talked about some of those other reports and some of the other sightings in the area, and it was just fascinating to me. But I love talking to eyewitnesses, period. But this one really caught my attention because there were so many other reports from the area. If you've had an encounter and you'd like to be on the show, shoot me an email. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. One of the things I wanted to mention was the Kandahar giant, and I posted it to the blog today. If you guys get a chance, please go check it out. It's a very, very fascinating story, and I realize it's not really technically Bigfoot related, but if you listen to a lot of Native American traditions, especially here in the U.S., about red-headed giants, cannibalistic red-headed giants, it's very interesting to contrast that to this story, compare and contrast to this story about the giant they killed in Afghanistan. So if you get a chance, please go check it out. Let's jump into it tonight. I want to welcome Scott to the show. Hey, Scott, thanks for coming on tonight. Appreciate you being here.
You're welcome.
And if you would kind of start from the beginning. I know I was just looking over your email. We talked a little bit before we went on air. Just kind of start from the beginning, Scott. How long ago did the encounter take place? And then if you would, for the audience, just walk them right into your first encounter.
Alrighty, my first encounter took place in 1979. We used to go out looking for deer. I live in Wisconsin, northeastern Wisconsin. And for something to do, we'd go out looking for deer after dark, just counting the deer in the fields and what have you. So this particular night, I was riding with my mother and my sister. My mother was actually driving the car. I was riding in the back seat. And we were going along the road, and we pulled up to a stop sign. And on the right-hand side of the road, there was a very small field. It was only approximately 75 feet square. And it was red brush around that field. And every once in a while, there'd be a deer standing in there on a deer trail. So I just naturally looked over when the car slowed down for the stop sign right there. What I thought I saw standing in the field was a bear. And I was looking at it, and my mind was going a million miles an hour saying, that's one ugly bear. That can't be a bear. There's something wrong with the bear's face, because a bear has a long snout. And this one had a flat face, and I was wondering, if it was deformed or what have you. So the longer I'm looking at this animal standing in that little field, I noticed that he has a stick in its hands, and he's poking the stick in an anthill, and he would leave it in there for 15, 20 seconds and then pull it out, and he would eat the ants off. All the while it was doing that, it was kind of watching us to see if we were going to be a threat to it, I think. So I'm watching this thing. I didn't say a word to anybody. I thought we were just going to drive off, and that would have been fine with me, because this didn't look overly friendly while it was standing there. And then all of a sudden, the animal stood up. What I thought was a bear standing there was actually, it kind of looked similar to some kind of an ape or a gorilla or something like that. And the head was kind of pointed. And when it stood up, it stared at us for approximately 5 to 10 seconds. And I'm thinking it's going to charge the vehicle. But it didn't. It slowly turned around and started walking away. And while it was walking away, it was looking over its right shoulder, watching us, kind of giving us a glare, like, you disturbed my meal, or it just looked angry. I didn't know what it was. I didn't say a word.
Did anyone else in the car see it?
Yeah, my mother and my sister both saw it. Nobody said a word when we were looking at it. My mother started pulling away from the stop sign, and about 10 seconds later, she said to me, "What was that standing in the field?" And I'm playing dumb, like what? I wanted to make sure that somebody else saw what I saw before I was going to start talking about it. She said,
Right.
the thing that made you roll your window up. So I don't know how I figured the window was going to protect me, but once it stood up, I just automatically rolled my window up and watched it out of the window. I said, I don't know. I've never seen anything like that before. And we just kind of went on our way. And we didn't really know a whole lot about Bigfoot or anything like that. It's not a real big topic in this area.
Yeah, it's interesting, the behavior you mentioned. I had a hunter I spoke to last week, and he didn't want to come on the show, but he described to the T the same behavior you just did. He said it had a stick in his hand, put it down in this little anthill, it lifted up, eat the ants off the stick, put it back down, and he wasn't even sure what he ran into. He said, maybe it's a gorilla on the loose, I don't know. This was in Oklahoma, by the way. I don't think there's too many gorillas running around. That's what he described. He said he saw it, put the stick in, lift it up, eat the ants off of it, or eat some sort of insects off of it. He said it just was very odd. It was very strange. So that's fascinating, I guess, just for a side note for the audience. But go ahead, Scott. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, no, that's great, because while I was watching it, like I said, my mind was racing a million miles an hour trying to figure out what it was. I spent countless hours in the woods hunting and fishing, and in that area right there, my grandparents lived just a couple miles down the road from where we were at. And that animal had to put that stick in that anthill at the very least a half a dozen times, probably closer to 10. It didn't just get up and walk away. We stayed there approximately, I would guesstimate, 3 to 5 minutes. We sat there looking at this, and everybody was, I guess, shocked because nobody said a word about it. My sister seen it, and we didn't really talk too much about it after that. She wasn't an outdoors person, she's never forgot the story. Now, later on that year, approximately a mile down the road from where this happened, we deer hunted. And I remember my uncle telling me on opening day I should take my vehicle and drive over to this spot and walk in an hour earlier than everybody else. His theory is that once you get in there and start walking around and sit down, the deer are going to forget you're there. When the other people normally come walking in, the deer are just going to move in your area. That was his theory, and I thought, okay, I'll do that. Well, I pulled up to this logging road and pulled in there. I shut my vehicle off, lit up a cigarette, and turned my headlights off. And as soon as I turned my headlights off, something started walking out of the woods at the car. And I was happy. I thought, cool, the deer are moving. So I waited a little bit, and I thought, well, they're close enough now. I should be able to see them in the woods. Turned my headlights on, and whatever it was just quit walking, stopped right in its tracks. I thought, well, that's strange for a deer. Normally they're not. They're more passive. They'll just keep on walking. So I thought, well, that's cool. Shut my headlights off, and the animal started walking again. And I thought, well, it's coming my way. I'm going to be able to see it. Waited approximately 30 seconds. The noise was getting louder. I turned the headlights on again. Same reaction. It stopped dead in its tracks. And whatever it was had to be hiding behind trees because I could see a little ways down a logging road, and the woods wasn't all that thick. And whatever it was had to be within 50 yards of me at this time. So I shut my headlights off again. I'm thinking, this is weird. When I shut my headlights off the third time, it started coming at the car really fast. Well, I turned the headlights on, started the car, and went home. I thought, I'll wait till daylight before I go in the woods now. Whatever that was, that time was really big, and it actually sounded like it was walking on 2 feet instead of 4 legs.
Yeah, I don't blame you for leaving. I probably would have taken off too. Did your grandfather ever have anything happen around his property during this time? I know he lived, would you say half a mile or a mile from where you originally had the encounter? Yep.
And this was all kind of like in a circular area. Where I had parked this vehicle was like a half a mile from my grandparents' house. That following spring, my grandfather raised chickens and ducks and geese. That's the time that those turkeys were killed we were talking about. Something had walked through that turkey pen that we had made and took 19 turkeys.
Wow.
Left one behind. That's the one that I told you they stepped on it and flattened it right out. And the next day when my grandfather saw his turkeys were gone, he sent my brother and I out in the woods with guns to find out whatever did it and to look for any turkeys or any sign that could be left. We didn't even find a feather. And these turkeys were over half grown, so it wasn't just one animal that picked them up and carried them off. There's no possible way.
What did your grandfather think it was?
He had no clue. He was thinking maybe a bear, something like that, because whatever it was had to be exceptionally strong. We helped him build the pen that the turkeys were in, and it was built exceptionally strong. And whatever it was walked right through it like it was nothing. And that's the summer that I had the animal walk up to the trailer window where I was, because I stayed with my grandparents in the summertime. I worked with my grandfather. And I was sitting there watching a football game one night with all the lights off in the trailer. And as I was sitting there, I noticed our hunting dogs were whining like little puppies, and I could hear them pulling on their chains, which was the only time I've ever heard them do that. And I thought, well, that's weird. So I just opened up the window and I yelled at them to be quiet and lay down. And that's when I heard something breathing on the opposite side of the window. And I thought, wow, there's something standing here looking at me. And it was pitch black. I couldn't see anything outside.
How high up would you say that window was?
7.5 to 8 feet.
Wow, so you know it's tall.
Yeah, and that location on the trailer was about 20 feet from the end where the living room was. And I stayed in the bedroom on that end of the trailer. So when I figured there was something in the window looking at me, I just went to that bedroom. and I slowly cranked open the window on the end of the trailer. It's the old style window that had the crank on it. I thought, well, I'm going to listen and just see if I can hear anything. Well, lo and behold, I had no more than cranked that window open, and I could hear something come walking around the end of the trailer right up to the window I was looking out of. And again, I couldn't see anything out the window. And all I could do was hear it breathing. I thought,
What did the breathing sound like?
it was kind of like deep, raspy breaths. You know, it wasn't like a dog or anything like that, how they pant. It was nothing like that. It was totally different from anything I've heard. It sounded menacing. So what I did was I closed the drapes on the window, grabbed my deer rifle, loaded it, and just kind of leaned up against the inside wall and waited for daylight. And it was gone by daylight. And it was dry. There was no tracks or anything outside of the window or outside of the trailer. By morning, the dogs were all fine again.
What's going through your mind at this point? I mean, what are you thinking is out there? Because even for a bear, that's a pretty big bear.
That was not a bear.
I mean,
Yep.
You're talking on the size of...
Yep.
No, and I understand it wasn't a bear, but I mean, even for that height off the ground...
Yeah, that was huge. I was thinking it was one of the creatures that we had saw alongside the road eating the ants, because nothing else made sense. Our dogs chased bear constantly when we were out in the woods. They weren't afraid of bear. And there were 6 or 7 dogs, throughout the back behind the trailer, and every one of them was whining like a puppy. I didn't know it at the time, but that animal came back the following Sunday night, and my uncle has a trailer on the same property. It came up to his window, did the same thing, made the dogs do the same thing. He grabbed his .44 revolver and he went outside and tried to find out. He thought it was a guy. He tried to find out what was going on and who was messing around out there. And he said whatever it was would stay just out of his flashlight beam, and it was walking half circles. I think it sounded like it was curious, trying to see what was going on. It didn't attack the dogs or anything. They were all on chains, chained up to their coops. But this thing, that went on for like 15, 20 minutes out there, and he finally fired a shot with his revolver in the air. And then it took off into the woods. But, he doesn't know what that was.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. Did he ever say what he thought it was?
He never said what he thought it was. He was kind of shaken up by it, so he just kind of put it out of his mind. It was easier to deal with it that way.
Do you think your grandfather knew more than what he said as far as what was going on out there?
I think so, because at the time that I had the creature come walking up to the car while we were deer hunting, and right around the time that the turkeys were killed, we had friends that had a farm on the opposite end of the woods, and they had a cow that was mutilated and killed, and nobody could figure out what it was. Nobody had an idea. The farm boys on that end of the woods wanted me to post on a high hill, and they were going to drive that swamp out, and I was supposed to shoot whatever came out, which I very quickly unvolunteered from that job. The last thing I needed to do was have one of those things come running past me.
Yeah, I don't blame you. What did you think they were? I mean, what at the time, I know it's 1979, 1980, and really there's no internet.
No.
I guess for the kids listening today, there was no internet. There was really, beyond the library, there's really no information on it. If you caught something on TV, it was very rare to see something on TV about Bigfoot at that time. What did you think they were?
Monsters. It's the only way we could describe them at that time. It was just recently, within the last 10, 15 years, that it kind of dawned on us what was going on and what was there. When we started seeing the different Bigfoot shows and what have you on the internet and TV and everywhere else.
Yeah, then it kind of hit you, oh, that's what that was back in 30 years ago. 35 years ago, that's what was bothering us.
Yep. And both the only thing we saw that started to make sense was that In Search of movie with Leonard Nimoy. and he did one on Bigfoot. And it's like, I think we got one in the area, or two actually, because in 1981, my girlfriend and I were taking a ride out looking for deer in that area, and we saw a really tall one walking in a stream. I'm pretty sure he was fishing, or he was just using the stream for cover to go from the Green Bay into the woods.
Can you describe what you saw?
Yeah, at first it looked like a huge man in a fur coat. As we got closer, I realized that it wasn't a man walking on the roadside. It was actually something very big walking in the stream. The night before, I was actually in that stream fishing. We were smelting. So I know that the stream was really deep. I could walk in there and the top of my head was even with the roadway. People couldn't. I had a ride come and pick me up down there, and they didn't even see me standing in the stream. And here, this animal looked like, well, he's about as high as a normal man while he was walking in the stream up above the roadway. So I'm guesstimating he had to be probably 9 feet or more. My wife, she turned out to be my wife, but my girlfriend at the time said, "Stop the car. Let's take a look at him. Let's look. You're crazy. We'll take a ride and come back and see if he's still here." We did. We took a little ride for half an hour, and luckily it was gone.
Were you able to see the face or anything like that?
Seen the face on it, and it wasn't a hairy face, but it was a leathery type of lighter colored skin on that one. On the first one that my mother and sister and I saw, that one was like a grayish colored, really light color. The face looked similar to a gorilla, but it was different. I guess, after seeing this Patterson movie, the one that we saw the first time was really, really similar to that animal that was walking there. Just the way the head looked and the way it was walking. And I was surprised that something that big, once it got to the red brush, which is really thick, when it stepped in there, it didn't make a sound. Or you or I or anybody else, we would have been making all kinds of noise and having a hard time going through it. It just melted right into it.
Yeah, and I've heard other witnesses describe that. What did your girlfriend say at the time, or your wife now? I mean, what did she think about this whole thing?
She don't want to talk about it.
Yeah, she wants nothing to do with it.
Up in this area, if you bring it up, people laugh at you, even now. There wasn't a whole lot going on after that. I actually thought about giving up hunting and outdoor activities in the woods. I seriously thought about it for a year, and I thought, well, I can't do that. I grew up doing this. So I went back in the same places and the river bottoms and stuff and messed around. And I've seen some different funny-looking wood structures and stuff while I was in there, but I didn't really have the knowledge to know that I would look at them and say, that's impossible. I don't know how that could be that way, but, I didn't have the knowledge to take pictures of it or whatever, and didn't know that animals could actually make those. And they were kind of like teepee-shaped things and like markers and stuff like that. Not really good cover, I wouldn't think, but almost like somebody was marking something.
And I wanted to ask you, when you saw that very first creature, how big would you say it was?
That one would have been between 500 to 600 pounds.
So very large. I mean, you're still thinking bear when you rolled up on. That's why you thought bear when you first rolled up on it.
That, for our area, that would be an exceptionally big bear. Most of our bear are about 200 to 300 pounds. You have a nice bear.
Yeah.
The thing that made me think it was a bear is I didn't know it was kneeling down at the time when I was looking at it, but it would have been the proper height for a big bear standing on its back feet when I saw it. That's the only reason why I thought it was a bear, and it was dark colored, and it was the only thing that made sense at the time.
Did you ever get a chance to talk to your mom years later?
Yeah.
About that incident?
Yes, I did.
What did she say?
She said the same thing. She's 99% sure she saw Bigfoot.
And so did the incidents end after that? I mean, did it kind of back off after that, or did you have any more incidences after this?
For a few years, it backed off. It's almost like whatever it was moved out of the area, which makes sense to me because I've been kind of looking at the BFRO website because I really had nowhere to get information from. And about this time, they were starting to see a lot of the same animals up in Pembine, Wisconsin, which is about just over an hour drive from where I live. And, retired police officers, credible people have been seeing them up there. And we had talked last week. That's where I was trout fishing last year and had that bluff charge by that one. And that was middle of summertime. And
tell us about that. What happened?
All right. I was on this river. I was out in the middle of nowhere. It was off of County Highway A, which is off of Highway A, and up in our neck of the woods. That's in the middle of nowhere. There's a few cabins and stuff that people have for vacations, but they're probably 2-3 miles away from where I am at the time. So I've been trout fishing this stream for probably a month and a half. I have a trail worn in the woods and along the stream and stuff where I've been walking. It's not too obvious because I don't want to share my trout stream with anybody if I don't have to, so I don't leave a blatant.
I understand that.
Right. Just something that I know and something that I can walk on and find my way. Well, about my 7th time in there, heading upstream, I'm walking on the trail, and I have my fly rod and stuff, and I'm trying to weave it through the brush and stuff, and it's going along pretty good. And all of a sudden I come to basically what I'd call a roadblock in my trail. By this time I'm in some really thick brush. It's probably 2 feet over my head and so thick I could only see a foot on either side of me. When I was standing there facing up the trail, up the river, both of my shoulders, my right shoulder and left shoulder, was actually touching the brush. That's how narrow the trail was. And I'm standing there looking at this big, huge tree branch that's in my way, and I'm thinking, where on earth did this come from? There's no trees this size here. And I'm looking at it and thinking, well, somebody had to place this in my way just to be a jerk. Must be some other fisherman up here that I don't know about. And I'm standing there looking at it, and I'm thinking, well, a man would have placed it with the thickest part down. That's basically what we do, if we're going to block something. If we take a branch, we always put it at the heavy end facing the ground.
Right, yeah.
Whatever put that in my way had it opposite. The thickest part was sticking up in the air, and it was jammed down as far as they could get it and brush in front of me. I had a clearing underneath it about my knee height, and I'm standing here thinking something doesn't want me in here. So I'm thinking, well, I have two choices. I can either turn around, and that's going to show fear. That could be trouble for me. Or I could stand here like a dummy and wait for it to come here and check me out, or just kneel down and crawl underneath this and go on my way. And that's the dumb idea that I chose. So I crawled underneath this branch and went up the trail. And then I felt like I was being watched. So I'm thinking, I'm not going to go too far. So I went about 50 yards up ahead of me to where the river made a bend. And I just got into the river. And the river is only about 15 feet wide. It's not a big river. So I get in the river on the bend, and I start walking downriver towards my vehicle. When I get about 50 yards, and the water's ice cold and chest deep. At this time, the temperature outside was in the high 80s to low 90s, and the humidity was unbearable. So it actually felt nice being in the water. When all of a sudden, something from the northeast in the woods just come running full speed at me. He was running through the brush. It wasn't like a deer where a deer will jump and go through the brush and not make a whole lot of noise. This thing was going through the brush and knocking the little saplings and stuff down. So right away I think, bear. So I grabbed my .45, set my fly rod down in the tree that I was standing next to, and I get ready to shoot a bear that's charging me. So I'm thinking, the bear's, I don't know how he knows I'm here. My scent couldn't have went that far, at that time to have a bear charge me. It didn't make any sense to me. So I stand there and I wait, and this thing's coming full bore right at me, and all of a sudden it gets to the edge of the river where I'm standing about 50 yards away from me, and it stops dead right on the edge. And I can see its head above the brush that was there. And I would say that was approximately 7.5 feet to 8 feet tall, where that was. And I could just see his head turning, looking up and down the river. And then it just stopped and looked in my direction and stayed like 10 seconds looking in my direction. And I'm thinking, yep, it saw me. So I'm thinking, at this time, I'm thinking goofy thoughts, game warden or a bear or whatever. So I had no idea. And then I'm thinking, looking at it, thinking, well, that's not a game warden. It's not a human. It's not a bear. A man couldn't be running through this woods like this right now. He'd be dead. 85 degrees and the humidity as high as it was. Then it took off running, and it ran about 50 feet away from me right along in the real thick brush. And I'm thinking it's going to charge from the side. So I just stood there with my gun in my hand waiting. I waited about 10 minutes, and it was dead quiet. As soon as it got right even with me, it stopped. So I'm thinking, yep, here we go. So I just slowly grabbed my fly rod out of the tree, and I started making my way down the river. And there was no more incident after that there at that time. I just decided it wasn't a good idea to fish alone in that area. And according to the BFRO website, they have 4 or 5 sightings right there within a mile of that area where I was fishing. They just posted another one on there just recently. I have a friend that lives up there, and nobody will talk about it. Nobody wants to be that person that seen one up there.
Did your friend see one?
No, he just heard weird things, and he believes they could be there. He doesn't want to tell anybody he believes, and he doesn't. He owns a beef farm, so he doesn't want to have to deal with people laughing at him or whatever. He also owns a construction company up there.
Yeah, and I can understand that. I can definitely understand that.
Right.
Why do you think they're in that area?
Oh, it's desolate. There's actually caves and stuff in that area for them to winter in. It's just you could walk in there. You and I could walk in there side by side and separate. And if we didn't yell at each other to find our locations, we would never see each other again. That's how thick and desolate it is in there. There's very little landmarks, very little anything. And it's just, if you like wilderness, it's a real nice place to go.
Why do you think the creature backed off from you? I mean, it has you in sight. You stepped across an area, you probably, because of the gun?
Because of the gun, I held it up for the whole world to see. It's like, hey, you're coming this way, buddy. I got a 45 with your name on it. And right at that time, I'm thinking, yep, we're going to have evidence of a Bigfoot, even though he's going to be twisting my head off. Because I told my buddy where I was going to be, so he'd eventually come up here and look. Maybe. I don't know. He's afraid to go out after dark now.
Did the creature follow you out, or did it just stay there and watch you walk out?
I think it followed me out. Because all the while I was walking out, the hair in the back of my neck was standing up. And I normally don't feel that sensation when I'm out there in the woods. And, there's little things that you can hear in the distance, like not a lot of movement. Because I'm telling you, when this thing wants to be quiet, it can be quiet.
Yeah, and you're right. You hear a lot of witnesses say that. And I don't know if it has to do with the pads on their feet or just the way they move in general. But you would think a creature this large would sound like King Kong coming through the forest. And it seems like the only time you hear that is when they want you to hear that. For the most part, they're pretty quiet.
See, I think he was sending me a message at that time when he was running at me. Because it sounded like a football squad running through the brush at me. It made way more noise than a bear or anything else, any other animal I know of that could have been running through there. I mean, I hunt deer all the time. Even in that kind of terrain and stuff up here in that brush, they don't make nowhere near the noise that thing made. And just to stop there, it knew where I was, but didn't know exactly where I was because I went past its boundary it set up for me in its trail.
Did it ever cross your mind to just say, hey, I'm done hunting, I'm done with this?
Yeah.
I don't know what these things are.
That crossed my mind several times. Back in 2013, I was teaching my daughter how to deer hunt. She was 16 years old. we went back to the river bottom where within probably a quarter mile of where I seen the first one when we were out looking for deer. And we hunted pretty much the whole afternoon, and half an hour before dark, I shot a big doe. So I thought, well, being my daughter's a girl, I'll call up my brother and have him come and take her out of the woods before it gets too dark, and, you know, he can take my gun and anything else heavy because I'll just drag the deer out. And I'm not thinking, I get out there and I spend so much time out in the woods, I try to put all these other thoughts and things that happen in the back of my mind and not dwell on it. And I figure if I ever run into one, then that was just fate. But I'm dragging this deer out after dark. All of my gear and everything else went back with my brother to my vehicle, which was about 500 yards away. And I'm just get the deer about 50 feet maybe from where it originally was, where the gut pile was. And I had just bought one of those fancy deer harnesses where you strap yourself in there really nice and good and tie the deer to the end of the harness. And you're just nice and secured to this deer now, which when I look back on it, that's a dumb idea.
Yeah.
Anyways, this thing swam across or walked across the Peshtigo River, the river bottom where I was hunting. There's a huge island about a mile long, and it's a couple hundred yards or more wide. And people don't very rarely go there. If you do, it's only one or two people at a time, and they'll go in there deer hunting, but it's very, very rare people go in there. All of a sudden, like I said, I just start dragging this deer out, and I think my brother's playing a joke on me because somebody comes running full tilt at me from the direction of the river. No light, no nothing, completely dark. I can't even see my hand in front of my face. And I'm thinking, as a matter of fact, I yell at him, "Boy, you're stupid." And then I realized that's not my brother. My brother went the other direction. There's no possible way he could have got around me because we were surrounded by water on three sides. This thing ran right up to me, and the same thing, I could hear the breathing, and it was walking on two legs in a half circle around me right at the end of my deer. Unfortunately, I did not bring a bright flashlight out with me. It's first year I used a GPS for navigation in the woods, and I thought, what do I need a light for? Well, I know why you need lights now. So I started dragging this deer and looking in that direction because it was following me. It was trying to get between me and the deer. And unfortunately, the deer's nose was tied so short, it was hitting me in the back. So getting between me and the deer was an impossibility for it. I go about another 50 yards with this deer. I'm getting tired, extremely scared at this time. Then my fear goes from fear to anger. And it's like, that's about it. I pulled out my hunting knife, which was this tiny little charade, 4-inch long blade. Kind of felt foolish when I thought back on it. And I went and stood on top of my deer and said, "I'm a human. Leave me alone. This is my deer." And I was standing there talking to it. It's still walking around me, trying to figure out what's going on. It wasn't a cougar. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a wolf. I've had all those things walk around me in the dark. You can hear all four of their feet touching the ground. This thing was on 2 feet, and it was walking back and forth. It must have been a small one because I think a big one would just thump me in the head and took the deer if you really wanted it.
So what happened? Did you leave the deer, or what happened next?
No, I didn't leave the deer. I started dragging it. And luckily, my brother came back to help me. When he come back, he had a real bright flashlight. And we were in a real low area. When he come back, he was on top of a hill, and he just kind of lit up the treetops. And when that happened, it left. It didn't run away. It just slowly walked away, but it stayed out of my vision and stayed away from my brother's vision. I didn't even tell my brother about it. He doesn't believe in any of this stuff. Told him about the first and second sightings I had and whatever. So I just said, "Yeah, glad you came back to help me."
You must have been terrified.
Say the least. I forced myself to go back there hunting the next morning, though. Thought if I'm going to have to go hunting, I can't be afraid to go in there. And it never came back the next morning.
Yeah, that would terrify me. That would really terrify me. I think I'd give up hunting at that point, because it's two predators fighting over prey. dead prey, and that's not a good situation to be in.
No, and I should have just, realistically, my advice to anybody else in that situation, leave the deer. I don't know why I stood there and was a jerk about arguing with this thing. Just by listening to it walk, you could tell it was bigger than I was.
Tell me about these photos you sent me, these game cam photos.
Those game cam photos, they're dated. I don't remember the date that's on them right now off the top of my head. They were taken on a property up in the Upper Peninsula, about 10 miles from where I live here in Wisconsin. A buddy of mine, he's into bear hunting and deer hunting big time. He's got 80 acres, and he puts out game cameras, and he keeps them out year-round. And he just, he'll let the batteries die in the fall, and he'll go and get the cards and stuff in the spring. And that's what he did. He went and got the cards and put new batteries in the game cameras in the spring, and he had about 400 or 500 pictures he had to go sort through. In about a month after he picked up the cards, he called me up and said, "You ain't going to believe this." He says, "You need to come here and take a look at this." And I'm like, "Buddy, he has a hard time starting a computer, so I know he can't Photoshop what you're looking at." So I get over there, and he says, "Now look at these 3 pictures." And I didn't see it the first time. It wasn't circled. I said, "What are you looking at?" I was looking at the deer. That's where I was focusing. I thought maybe a bigger deer or something was going to come up in there. He says, "Look at the middle picture." And then I saw it, and it's like, what is that? I started messing around with the picture on the computer, and that actually had the same shape of head that the first one that I saw in Wisconsin had. And he said, "I'm not saying that's a Bigfoot." He said, "I don't really even believe in that." He said, "But I can't explain this." He said, "I'm a bear hunter, I'm a deer hunter, and I've never seen this before."
Yeah, what's interesting about the pictures is that the deer almost looks like it's focused in that direction, too.
Yep. And the only reason that picture was taken is that deer set the camera off.
How far from this property is where you had your encounter?
20 miles. But now I've had other encounters.
It's pretty close.
Yep. I've had other encounters. Now my sister lives, as the crow flies, about 3 miles away from where that picture was taken on the game camera. And she's had all sorts of problems by her house the last 2 years.
What kind of problems?
Well, something big coming through her yard at night. And this is weird, but she has quite a few coyotes in her area. And every once in a while, the coyotes would be going crazy. And something else howls at the coyotes, and then they're done for the night. They shut right up, and they leave. And she says, when that howls, it makes the hair in the back of your neck stand up. She says, you can tell it's not a coyote. So, being that I've always been interested in the outdoors, I said, well, how often does it happen? She said, about 3-4 times a week. So, well, I'm going to go spend some time by your house and, later than normal, and I'll just kind of hang around. I did that, and I was, like I said, it's about 3 miles away from where this picture was taken in the woods. And this is solid woods from where that picture was taken all the way up to my sister's house. And my sister, unfortunately, lives in a natural funnel in the woods. They come right along the edge of her house. And then there's a big woods across the road from where she lives. That's why she's having the activity, because they're using that little funnel right there to get back and forth from the big woods, not to be seen. There is half a dozen houses and stuff in the neighborhood right there. It's way out in the country. She's 15 miles out of town in the country. But like my other buddy with the pictures of the deer and the creature, he says, yeah, you live in a little city. You don't live in the country. That kind of a setup. But anyways, we're sitting there, and I go out there, and I hear a couple of weird howls way off in the distance. And I thought, well, that's pretty cool. So I told her, I said, I'm going to bring my predator call. And you and I will go out there one night when it's nice, and I'll just take the fawn in distress and, use that to see if we get any responses. So we go about 100 yards away from her house, right where this natural funnel is. In this natural funnel, it turns into hardwood trees into a little pine plantation, and the pines go right up to the road. So we're standing there on this gravel road, and I'm whispering to her, saying, okay, I'm going to start the caller. We started the caller, and about 15 minutes later, I hear what sounds like a human whistle coming out of the pines, just one real sharp whistle. And about 100 yards farther down, I hear another whistle, and I'm thinking, well, that's odd. There's no people in there. So I'm playing around with the caller, and I do the rapid distress call and leave that go for a little bit, and the whistles are a little bit closer this time. So the third time they whistled, they were communicating back and forth. I whistled too. I mimicked the whistle that they were doing. And then I got two more whistles, one from each of them. Then we were bluff charged from behind. What it looked like they were doing was making a drive for animals, deer, or whatever that's in that woods, towards the main road down that natural funnel. And there was one waiting across the road from us. And we screwed up their hunt. And the one that was behind us got upset. And my sister, she screamed, oh, my God, she's getting ready to take off running. Well, I stopped her before she got more than 20 feet from where she was standing. I said, you can't run from predators. Said, come back over here and stand by me. I had a gun. I thought, I was hoping it would stop because it sounded pretty dang big. It was dark out. But yeah, it sounded like they were doing a coordinated deer drive, and just like hunters will do, where they whistle back and forth for positions. That's what was going on in the woods. It was really weird.
Yeah, that is interesting. And the thing that your sister mentioned to you in the beginning, I've heard something similar to that out here in Chehalis, Washington, where it sounded like coyotes just going off, and then it sounded like something way outside of the range of coyotes roars or screams or tries to mimic the coyotes, but it sounds too big, it sounds too large.
Right.
It just doesn't sound right for coyotes, and then the coyotes will shut up after that. That's fascinating. Your sister said that, because I have experienced something similar here in Washington State.
She's had that happen in her yard there about a half a dozen times now. Another thing that I've noticed that was weird is my cousin and I, we do predator hunting. We go out at night in the wintertime and call. And one night I went out alone, and I'm in this river bottom. I don't know why I go out there alone. When I think back on it, predator hunting is not a good idea anyways, but I got my back up against a tree. I'm in full snow camo, feeling pretty secure. And I start calling, and about 20 minutes later, this bigger sized animal is coming up out of the river bottom and walking around, and almost sounded like it was walking around in circles trying to figure out where the distressed animal was. At first I was thinking maybe it's a deer. So then I listened for a little while longer and thought, well, this is probably not a good idea to be out here alone. So I gathered up my gear and left. My cousin and I went back to the same place about a week later. It was closer to the dark of the moon, so we had a hard time seeing. So we're calling, and for some reason, the woods was dead still. There wasn't the normal night sounds that we were used to hearing out there. And when we call with the rabbit call, we always have owls hoot at us, and they come in and try to pick up our decoys. Well, we're calling, and we have this owl that's coming in from the big woods behind us. And we're thinking, this is just something different about this one, but we just kind of shrug it off, and we quit calling. We head back to the vehicle, and this owl is still calling from about 50 feet inside the woods from the other side of where we're parked. And his last call went from an owl hoot to a coyote call right in the middle of it, which was just totally weird.
Wow. That is weird.
I mean, we can't say we can't say what that is because we don't know. It was in the dark, and it was just totally weird that whatever was calling was mimicking an owl. And then in the end, for some reason, it mimicked a coyote call halfway through its call.
What do you think these things are, Scott?
Honestly, I think there's some type of primate. They appear to be really curious.
Do they worry you at all?
Yes. We have a situation right now, right in that same river bottom that I had that animal come after my deer. A friend of ours has built a cabin down in there. None of these guys believe my stories when I tell them. So they're like, yeah, okay, you're having problems with a bear or whatever. Well, he's building this cabin down in there. They're not living in it yet, but every day his wife and his wife's friend, they walk from their cabin through the woods on a 4-wheel trail down to the river, which is about 300 yards from the cabin that they're building. And for the last year and a half, every time they walk along this trail, something's walking alongside of them, grunting at them. And they're saying it's a bear. I've talked to bear experts that hunt bear, and they say bear don't do that. If that was a bear, he would just charge them if he was interested in it.
Yeah.
And this has been going on for a year and a half right now. And my uncle drew a bear permit this year, and we were asked to go in there and shoot the bear that's causing the problem. So we have a bait set up down in there right now. I told my uncle, I said, dude, you're not going to sit down in there alone. I'll go and sit with you. 99% sure what they're talking about is not a bear. And my uncle's 99% sure that he's not going to believe, that it isn't a bear. So just to be on the safe side, like I told him, I said, I'll go sit, bring my 357 with me and wait. I would never, ever walk in the woods again unarmed. Not after that first night with that deer. So no more than that happened, I went out and got my concealed carry permit, and I carry a pistol with me wherever I go.
Yeah, I don't blame you. You still haven't given up hunting, huh?
No, but there's a few times when the hair in the back of my neck stands up when I start thinking about it, and I just try to put it out of my mind. I hunt in the same area.
Well, be careful, will you? I mean, it's that old saying, sometimes when you play with fire, you get burned. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know. I just refuse to let it intimidate me, I guess.
Yeah, and I can appreciate that. A lot of times when people run into these creatures, that's it. They're done hunting. They never step foot in the woods again, and it takes a long time to get back to that. So I can definitely appreciate that. It sounds like they aren't, they're aggressive, but not necessarily violent in the area. You would have been done away with a long time ago, it sounds like.
Right. That's what I kind of figure, too. I wouldn't personally just go out there and shoot the first one I saw if it wasn't doing something aggressive. I would just try to back away from it. Well, unfortunately, they don't travel alone. There's always more than one, at least in our area.
Yeah, and that's what I tend to agree with you on that. I think that you when people run into them, it's the one you don't see. Just like in the situation where the two were driving you guys down trail, and then there's one behind you that you didn't even know was there. I tend to agree with you. I think that they don't travel alone. But I appreciate you coming on the show and sharing the encounters. I was fascinated by them, and I love it because it's during a time to where people weren't really coming out with their sightings. It wasn't so much accepted during this time frame. And not only that, there really wasn't a ton of information about it at this time.
Right.
But I can't thank you enough for coming on.
Well, thank you. It's nice having some place that I can go and listen and learn from. Because the only other place I went to was the BFRO, and that was a whole 5-minute thing, and my name's on their website now, and that's about it. I have no information, no nothing, none of my curious questions are being answered. I listen to your podcast at work all day long. So it's like I'll listen to each show 3-4 times just to learn as much as I can about what's going on. And it's really, I like your encounter. It's like, yeah, I know exactly what he's feeling coming up to the vehicles and stuff.
Yeah. And that's what I was thinking of when you were telling me about the one when you're sitting in the car with the cigarette. It's fascinating. I think the way you'll learn about these creatures is from people's experiences like yours, like mine, like other people that come forward. You tend to get little bits of information regarding their behavior, regarding different types, depending on what the witness says they saw. I just find the whole thing fascinating. And I think that's really, until the government comes out and says they're real, that's where you get the bulk of the information. It's a lot of it's theory, a lot of it's conjecture, but a lot of it really is based off of what eyewitnesses tell you.
Right. In our area right here, we have cougars on game cameras all the time, and our Department of Natural Resources refused to admit they're here. And I believe that they know that these other creatures are here, and for the same reason that they will not admit to a cougar being here, they won't admit to these other creatures here. And I cornered a Department of Natural Resources employee one time and had him actually tell me the truth and why they will not admit there's cougars here, even with all the pictures they have. And they said because it would cost thousands of dollars to regulate this and pass laws and everything else. He said, it's not worth it. We'll just keep on denying the fact that they're here.
That's interesting.
And I think that's why and that's why they will not admit that there's anything else like this in here. There's sightings in upper Michigan and in northeastern Wisconsin, around where I live. And I talk to people that hear weird noises outside their house at night that make the hair in the back of the neck stand up, and they won't go outside and check it over and stuff, howls and stuff like that. It's just people will not talk about it up here.
Yeah, and you find that in most places. And I'm hoping that the show kind of changes that. I hope that it, puts more people in a position to come out and say what they've seen. Because what you hear on the show really is a quarter of a percent of people coming forward. You know what I mean? There's way more than what you hear.
Right. And I thank you for the show and everything that you're doing. It's fabulous that people have an outlet like, somebody they can go and talk to, and, they're not ridiculed, and they're able to tell their story, and they're able to learn. I'm all about learning as much as I can about these.
No, I'm with you on that. Well, thank you again, Scott.
You're welcome. You have a good evening.
You have a good night too, Scott. And that's it for tonight, everyone. Remember, if you've had an encounter, shoot me an email. Wes@SasquatchChronicles.com. I will see you guys next time.